Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio, and it is Friday morning, March the 26th, 5:30 in the morning here in Calgary, Alberta. I'm so happy to be here, and I missed a few shows because my internet connection just wasn't very good, and the sound just wasn't very good, so the sound quality. So I actually skipped a few shows, so I'm glad to be back, and hopefully it's everything's good. I don't know, I can't tell, how the sound is until the show is over. So hopefully you can hear me, and I'm just glad to be here. We were on for 15 minutes. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, and just talking, we were going to finish up this article called Understanding Crisis, and I found this at www.childwelfare.gov, and that's the Child Welfare Information Gateway. And, we're just finishing up with the summary and just the crisis intervention assessment introduction part, and I didn't want to continue on too long with this, but I just thought it was so interesting, and it's kind of interesting to see what happens when there is an intervention being done and abuse has been reported in the home, and the crisis workers have to go into the home and try to help these parents and the family learn how to cope and problem solve, so that these they can prevent further crisis and further abuse, right? And so it's so important, and I think that, we had an intervention done when I was young, and I was really young, actually, and I only remember bits and pieces of it. My sister remembers a little bit more, but, I don't know, somehow we fell through the cracks, and the abuse just continued on, and my parents were actually allowed to get away with what they were doing, and so it's quite unfortunate because my parents were just really honestly good people who were having a really hard time coping and had their own emotional and psychological issues to work through. But on their own, they were good people. They just could not cope. They didn't have any good parenting skills or coping skills or problem-solving skills, and they worked against each other like all the time. And so that's why the abuse happened. That's why the domestic violence happened. It's not, that they weren't good people. They really spun out of control early in their marriage, and they continued to spiral down. And had they had the help that they needed, I really believe that their lives would have been different, and all of our lives would have been different. So that's why I was looking at this article. I thought it was really interesting. So yeah, we'll continue on with that. It's not a professional show. I don't hold any professional counseling certificates or anything, no therapist certificates. It's not meant to replace professional help. And I just ask everyone to listen at their own discretion, because you know what's good for you to listen to. And if the topics of abuse, might trigger you or cause you to be uncomfortable, just turn the show off. You won't be hurting my feelings. And if you're under the age of 18, I fight for child rights, and I also, I believe in online safety for children. It's like number one. It's a priority. So if you're younger, or under the age of 18, make sure you have someone listen to this show with you who you trust, just to make sure it's something that you should be listening to. And, because I do care about, that's why I fight for child rights. I know that there's children out there being abused, and there's all kinds of online safety issues. People, child predators, child sexual molesters and predators looking for children. So, you really need to be on the lookout and educated about online safety. And if you're a young person, you'd be doing yourself a favor by finding out about this, and also having someone listen to these types of shows with you to make sure it's okay for you to listen to. So we're going to continue on here. I'll just start with the summary. And we were talking on, I don't know, it might have been Wednesday morning, presence until the stress is reduced. And they were saying that, some families always just seem to be in a crisis all the time. They're just crisis prone. They're always living on the brink of another crisis, they said. And at least, one author has referred to exhaustion crisis, in which persons under consistent stress are finally overwhelmed by an additional internal or external stress and shock crisis, in which there is no forewarning prior to sudden change in the social environment. So chronically dysfunctional families who are reported for child abuse and neglect could fall into either category. And, like stress has become traumatic through repetition. So, if there's just crisis after crisis, some families are overwhelmed not only by abuse or neglect, but also by repeated inquiries into their abusive or neglectful patterns, right? So this can happen, and these, the safety of children is like of the utmost importance. And, there's so many families that need help, but because they have mental issues and emotional instabilities, themselves, the parents or the caregivers, whoever it is that's looking after these children, really, if they don't get the proper help that they need, they're just going to keep spiraling downward in these crises, and the abuse just keeps going. I mean, my family is a perfect example of that. So it's really sad. So in summary, they were saying a family is most likely to accept intervention from outsiders during a state of crisis. In contrast to traditional casework, crisis intervention is brief in duration, focused primarily on the here and now, and supports family members in what they, not the crisis worker, want to change. So a skillful crisis worker or crisis intervention team involves the entire family in the problem-solving process and reinforces the family's abilities and strengths and conveys a hopeful attitude to the family about problem resolution. Concrete services are provided to lessen pressures in the family and to free the family's energy for setting and achieving goals. And prior to termination of crisis intervention services, skillful crisis workers make sure that the family is linked to the resources it needs in the community and then formalize a plan for follow-up. Many families known to CPS agencies have multiple problems, and it is important to remember that crisis workers are not responsible for helping families solve all of their problems. Rather, the task is to help families stabilize and learn to focus and find solutions to a limited number of problems. In that way, families gain a sense of accomplishment and success, encouraging them to move on and to solving other issues, right? Either on their own or with the help of resources in the community. So that's just the whole thing, right? They can't come in and solve these problems, these crisis workers, and then just wander off. Okay, we're done here, because the family has not learned and doesn't have the skills to actually solve any further problems that come down the road. So, they have to actually sort of, it's almost like teaching parents, who have no parental skills, life skills, which can happen. My mom was abused as a child. She grew up in an abusive home herself, and then she left and married a man who had all kinds of insecurities and was borderline schizophrenic, and he had all kinds of emotional issues himself, and he was abusive towards her and the children, especially when they were really young, and she tried to get a divorce, and the Canada courts wouldn't allow it. They said, well, there was no unfaithfulness or infidelity in the marriage, so there was no way that she was getting out of it, and they didn't care about the abuse, right? That was back in the 1940s, and my mom would tell me about stuff like this, and she said, I tried to divorce him, because we would always tell her, why don't you just split? Why don't you guys just split? Separate, get yourselves together, whatever you have to do to have, to be happy, right? And she was like, no, she tried to get a divorce and it didn't work, so now, then she just stayed in the marriage. And they didn't learn how to cope, they didn't learn how to problem solve, they didn't learn, they took their anger and their own emotional issues out on us, regarding, every kind of abuse you can think of, really, that they were so wounded themselves and actually just passed that on to us, So this can happen, and I didn't have any children, and I always wondered, if I did, would I be a good mother? And I had a lot of issues to work out myself, and I'm still on the road, still working through a few things, but I think now I have a better handle on it. But I'm a lot older now. When I was younger, I don't think I would have had the skills necessary to be able to deal with my anger, to be able to not put the abuse that was put on me onto my own children. So important that parents get help if they think they might be abusing their children, because, I don't think my parents started out thinking, hey, we're just going to get married and let's just ruin a bunch of kids' lives. Yep, we'll just mistreat them and physically abuse them, and we'll just verbally abuse them every day, make them feel like they're worthless. They did not start out to do that, and it just happened, and that's unfortunate, that the things weren't put into place. They didn't actually want help. They didn't welcome any help from anybody, and it's unfortunate because I really attribute 2 of my brother's deaths because of my parents' behavior, and we all have choices to make as adults, but when you are so psychologically mistreated and so psychologically abused when you're a child, it's very hard as an adult to make right and proper decisions for yourself. So it's so important to get help, Crisis intervention assessment, they say, this is an introduction. This article keeps going. I don't know how long it is, but we'll just finish this part. Different personalities of individuals, the divergent environments in which they reside, the variety of psychological and biological makeups, and the varying family structures in which they lead lead to a broad range of responses to stress. Consequently, it becomes difficult to predict human behavior. Yet, it is necessary to make an attempt to assess the risk of abuse within families in order to protect family members. People in crisis need and are more responsible to immediate intervention, and report necessary for family assessment is more readily established by offering immediate emotional first aid and support when the family is frightened, confused, and experiencing emotional pain. A case of father-daughter incest illustrates the stages of crisis intervention. The multidisciplinary team learns that a hazardous event occurred when the father lost his job and received criticism from his wife. He felt or perceived himself to be in a vulnerable state. With the family not respecting him, he turned to a child in the family who seemed more understanding and least likely to reject him. Sexualizing his needs and feelings for the child, he misused his power by sexually touching the child, and who in turn told a friend who told the school authority. The case was reported and followed by an investigation, and by this time the family was in an active state of crisis. And it says, note, there can be several cumulative precipitating factors and successive crises in one family. So, it does not imply that sex abusers are not fully responsible for their perpetration, right? But this is just an example of what can happen, when a parent it spirals out of control and they turn to the children. So whether they abuse them physically, verbally, emotionally, or sexually, it's just really bad. And we know it's happening, right? So we have to stop child abuse. We really do. And so I think, I don't know if I want to keep going in that article because I wanted to really start focusing on online safety for children. And so I'll take a look at it and see if it's worth going into a little bit more for next week. Otherwise, we're going to start on online safety for children because it's so important. And, well, for ourselves too, but mostly for children, right? And I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and I'm so happy to stand with them, let me tell you. We are a not-for-profit, 501c3 charitable organization, right? Volunteers, all volunteers doing the work here for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. You can check out their website at www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com or .org. Either one will get you there. And it's a great website. And they have some great information on there on the signs and symptoms. What is child abuse? What are all the different types of child abuse? What are all the signs and symptoms for each type of child abuse? It's so important. To know the signs of physical abuse, those are easier to spot, right? To know the signs of emotional abuse, they'll be a lot harder to spot. The signs of psychological abuse, the signs of sexual abuse, some of those are hard to spot, and we need to become aware of the signs and symptoms of child abuse so that we can save children's lives, right? And then we also need to know how to report child abuse, because there's ways to report it. There's just a few questions that you ask. And there are certain things that you need to do in order to make to do a really good report to the proper authorities, right? Because if a person asks the wrong questions, then it could jeopardize the case, and the child could end up back in the home and be abused more or just killed at the hands of the parents and caregivers. So it's so important to know how to report child abuse and what to do if a child comes to you and says, hey, I'm being abused. Or if you suspect child abuse, you want to make the proper phone call to the authorities, to your local authorities. It's so important. You could save a child's life. We could save a child's life. They're counting on us, and they can't speak up for themselves. They can't stand up for themselves, so we have to do it for them. And I have a book published by Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. Donna Shear, best-selling author and president of Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and Sandra Dawn Potter, CEO and founder of Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, published my story. It's called A Life of Death, The Redemption. You can find it right now at lulu.com. And all the proceeds are going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children because I want the money to go to them to help further and help stop child abuse, further the education, the awareness, the prevention of child abuse, and I want it to stop child abuse. So the money is going directly to them. It makes me so happy, but it's my personal story, and you can pick it up at Lulu right now, and you can pick it up in a few weeks at Amazon and also at Barnes & Noble. It's called A Life of Death, The Redemption by Lori-Ann Smith, and it's $12.95, and it's all the proceeds are going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. So I hope you will pick up a copy and pass it on and you know, it's for a good cause, and not only that, but it's my personal story, and you know, who I dedicated to my brothers, Howard Wilmot Smith and Robert Chipley Smith, because had I not spoke out, they would have gone to their graves in silence. No one would have known about the abuse that they suffered, and so they would have gone to their graves in silence, and no one would have known. So I hope you will pick up a copy. Take care, everyone. I'll be back on tonight, 9:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, with child abuse prevention and human rights abuse prevention is up to us. And I hope that you can join me live. And take care, everybody, and have a great day. Bye-bye.